Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. The night presses close against the open road, carrying a silence that feels almost alive. Welcome to the sleep haunt where truth lingers in the shadows and fear rides quietly at your side. Tonight, we bring you 6 true, most haunting trucker horror stories encounters born from deserted highways, dim rest stops, and long stretches of darkness where something unseen kept pace with the wheels. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help us keep rolling deeper into the dark. And share your city and the time you're listening. In the comments, let's see who's awake with us on the night road. Now, settle in. Breathe slow, and listen. The road remembers everything. Story number 1. They said it happened on a wind-polished stretch of highway where the prairie opens like a dark ocean. The driver's name was Evan Rhodes, 30 years on the road, steady hands, and a habit of keeping the dial quiet. He pulled a refrigerated trailer eastbound with winter breathing along the glass. Out ahead, the sky held a low lid of stars. The windshield wipers tapped a lazy rhythm over a dry pane. He kept to the right lane out of courtesy and superstition. Evan's cab was an old friend's scuffed dashboard, a cassette deck that still worked if treated gently, a CB radio he rarely used except for weather alerts and way station calls. The radio was on but turned down to a soft murmur, more a nightlight than a tool. He liked the quiet, the way it made the distances fold neatly behind him. He liked the way mile markers appeared and slipped away like thoughts he didn't need to hold. Close to midnight, after he left the necklace of small-town lights scattered along the horizon, the CB breathed a wet breath of static. He glanced at the unit, as if the sound might drift out into the cab, then turned his eyes back to the road. A wind farm's red beacons pulsed in slow, disciplined rows. The voice, when it came through, was sanded by age and distance, rounded at the edges like something carried a long way and set down carefully. "Breaker, breaker. Bluebird. You got a copy?" Evan didn't move. No one called him Bluebird. He never had a handle. Not in decades. The nickname belonged to someone else, tucked away in a shoebox memory, a patch on a denim jacket that had hung in a closet when he was small. His father's handle, a bird stitched in navy thread on the shoulder. The CB fizzled and cleared again. "Bluebird, you're drifting up on 238. Ease back 10. Bridge up ahead, don't like a heavy foot tonight." He breathed in, breathed out, and let his boot relax on the throttle, as if the words had reached straight through the plastic housing and tapped him on the ankle. He put the rig down a notch. No one was behind him. No one was in the left lane. The night was a field of nothingness, cut into tall rectangles by his headlights. The overpass at mile 238 came and went, ordinary concrete with a frost line like breath along its bottom edge. He would have shrugged and put it out of mind. But as his trailer rolled off the bridge, a soft, dark shimmer slid across the lane ahead. The kind of thin black ice that did not look like ice, more like a trick of the eyes. The truck eased over it like a cat on a polished floor. The back end lifted a fraction, and then settled. No drama. A quiet correction. It might have been nothing, except that he felt the exact moment his tires found purchase again, and the way the steering wheel loosened gently in his hands. He pressed the talk button with 2 fingers he didn't realize were shaking. "Appreciated," he said, because old habits reach for courtesy when they are scared. He heard his voice come back to him through the speaker a half-second later, a stranger saying thanks. Static. Then, 10-4, Bluebird, keep it steady. He swallowed. The radio went soft. He drove on. The road returned to its blank study of darkness, and reflected signs flashing green-white before they vanished behind him. He did not change the station. He did not turn it up. He simply held the wheel and let the night be what it was. At a rest area miles later, he pulled in not because he needed to stop, but because something in him wanted the presence of other vehicles. The lot had 3 rigs tucked in the far corners like sleeping animals. A vending machine hummed under a yellow light. Wind combed the scrub. Evan stretched his legs and listened to the quiet settle in around the tires. Inside the building, the air smelled faintly of cleanser and coffee. A bulletin board held faded flyers for services, Caution signs about wildlife, a black and white photo of the highway in 1974 when the exit had been new. A maintenance worker in a reflective vest scraped sand into a bucket with unhurried motions. She glanced up at him, then at the CB on his belt clip like a badge nobody wore anymore. "Road's talking tonight," she said with the simple certainty of weather talk. "Seems like it," he replied. "Lot of drivers hear the old ones when the wind turns right. Could be the radio bounces off, whatever it bounces off. Could be folks don't stop talking just because the station's closed." She smiled without a smirk, as if the thought unsettled and comforted in equal measure. "Safe miles to you." He nodded and went back to his cab with a coffee cup he didn't want. The night wasn't colder than before, but his skin felt thin to it. He rolled out just as a pair of headlights swung into the lot like the slow blink of a creature waking up. The interstate accepted him without complaint. The CB stayed quiet until the horizon grew a faint glow like dawn deciding to visit late. Then, at a slight bend where the ground lifted just enough to feel like a shrug, the voice arrived again. "Bluebird." Two rigs tangled up at the bottom of the hill past 261. Flares on the right, rubberneckers on the left. "Slide out early. You'll see them late." Evan's hands tightened before they relaxed. He adjusted his lane gently left, far earlier than he would have. The scene, when it presented itself, was contained and orderly. Two disabled trucks, cozy with the shoulder. Hazards painting everything with a polite metronome of light. No one waved him down. No one clamored. He eased by as if moving through a living room where someone had fallen asleep in a chair and you didn't want to wake them. A mile beyond, he pressed the button again. "You got a name?" A breath. "Appreciated," he added, "because thank you is easier than a question with teeth." "Handle used to be Northline," the voice said with a chuckle that felt like it recognized itself from a long time ago. "Used to run this stretch more than the sun did. Keep an ear, Bluebird. Fog nest building at the river." He laughed once, a soft sound meant to keep the cab from feeling too empty. "Copy that." He did not ask why the voice kept calling him by a handle it could not know. He did not ask how it knew his route or his exact mile markers. He did not ask who, or when, or from where. The river lay ahead like a black thread. Sleepy winter fog often tucked itself low there, and let dawn pull it up like a sheet to shake clean. Tonight, the fog arranged itself in tall, careful rolls that hugged the banks, and then walked out into the lanes with such stillness that it looked solid. Signs whispered of reduced speed. Evan did what they whispered. A deer stood on the shoulder like a statue set there for scale, turning its head as the rig passed, and then lowering it again, unbothered by his noise. At a junction where newer asphalt cut off toward a toll stretch, the voice returned with a note that might have been urgency, if urgency could be polite. "Bluebird, you're gonna want Old Service Road. Next exit, main line is blocked 3 miles down, nobody moving. You go right, and you'll sit 3 hours watching taillights breathe." A pause. Service road's narrow, but she's true. "You keep to the center. Watch the mailboxes." Evan could have argued that trucks did not belong on that service road. He could have said that if the main highway was blocked, there would be signs and troopers. He could have pointed out that he had a schedule printed in black and white. Instead, with the clear mind of someone who has driven through many versions of the same dark, he put his turn signal on and let the rig whisper down the ramp, through a short sleeve of trees, and onto a 2-lane that curved like ribbon around the edge of a sleeping town. Mailboxes did appear stoic little sentries with names he did not try to read. A dog stood on a porch and blinked as if it recognized the hum of a big engine like a thunder it had known all its life. Evan kept to the center where the road wore fewer scars. The fog held close to the fields like breath on cold glass. He hummed under his breath to keep the cab from listening too hard. When the service road rejoined the interstate, blue-white strobes painted the underside of the overpass ahead. The highway beyond was a line of red lights, courtesy and frustration stretching away into the night. The on-ramp was empty, almost inviting. He floated back onto the main line, as if the whole road had been built for that motion, and was relieved to have him return. He did not speak into the CB. He wanted to. He wanted to ask Northline where he sat, in what pull-off, in what other year. He wanted to ask why he'd chosen Bluebird to speak to, and why the voice felt like its words had weight, even when they were ordinary. He didn't. He drove, closer to 3 in the morning, When tiredness makes thoughts soften at the edges, the voice returned as gently as a glove. Bluebird, way station's closed up ahead. You're gonna take the apron anyway. Stop at the first bay. Lights off. Keys on the dash. Count 30, then roll. Don't ask. Won't make sense to anybody you tell later. A pause, warm with a kind of kindness that made the hair rise on his arms. Trust the quiet. Evan's mouth was dry. He swallowed and tasted coffee that had long since gone into the memory of the cup. The way station sign blinked dark. The bays stood like empty mouths. He swung onto the apron without argument, took the first bay, and felt the rig sigh as the wheels found level concrete. He turned off the lights. The cab pooled into darkness that held him like a pocket. He placed his keys on the dash because that was what had been asked. He counted. 28, 29, 30. On 30, movement passed outside the bay so close and fast that it felt like the air in the cab leaned away from it. No collision, no horn, no scrape. A rush, like a meeting with weather. He sat there with his hands in his lap and knew, in that particular way that requires no proof, that if he had been out on the shoulder instead of tucked inside the hush of that bay, surprise would have tangled his attention in the worst way at the worst moment. He turned the key. The dash lights came up as if happy to have something to do. He eased out. The interstate accepted him once more. No drama. No reason given. A mile down, a long, silent convoy of escort trucks shepherded an oversized load under the stars. They did not look his way. They did not know him. The math of their passage and his pause added up perfectly. He felt the sum and kept his hands steady on the wheel. Dawn began to unroll in pale cloth along the edges of the world. The radio had gone back to its soft tidal noises. Birds started the business of morning out in the fields, bursting from the grass in the hundreds, like thoughts scattering from a mind. When he exited for a fuel stop at a truck plaza that had been serving drivers since before digital clocks, he parked, shut down, and sat for a moment longer than he needed to. The air felt clean when he stepped out. He heard laughter from the restaurant. Music he didn't know played low. Inside, behind a counter varnished by decades of elbows and coffee rings, an older man poured him coffee, as if they'd agreed to this meeting years ago. The man nodded at the CB clipped near Evan's seat. "You out overnight?" he asked. "Yeah," Evan said. "Fog by the river?" "Yeah." "You keep your ear to the wire?" Evan breathed in, breathed out. "Sometimes." The man smiled like a memory. Used to be a trooper who ran interference for drivers on this stretch. Before everything went new and neat. Stationed over to Miller's Cut. Sat in the way station with a pot of coffee and a radio, and just kept folks from making the kind of mistakes you only make once. Called himself Northline. Some say he just liked the sound of it. Some say he knew the road the way a hand knows its own lines. He looked at the window. Station closed up in the 90s. Lot changed. Not everything did. Evan listened to the story that avoided details. He watched a couple in a booth fold their napkins. He studied the hands pouring his coffee, the way they had learned long ago to fill without spilling. "They say he never left a driver hanging," the man went on. "Say he could tell when someone was getting thin around the edges. Talked them steady. Told them what they were about to see 10 seconds before they saw it. Could be radio tricks. Could be nothing. Could be the sort of help that stays in a place when the person moves on." He set the pot down. "You ask me. The road doesn't belong to any one time." Evan nodded. He said thank you because it fit everywhere. He ate eggs slowly, as if staying put a little longer would keep the night from catching up. When he returned to the cab, dawn had collected enough color to call itself morning, and he Saturday. He watched people walk with sleep in their steps and sunlight on their shoulders. He put the keys in the ignition and waited without turning. The CB let out a breath, as if testing its own voice. Then, faint, almost like a sound his mind added to the world because it had been thinking about it so hard, came 10, 4. Bluebird, keep that left mirror clean. The humor there, small and human, made him smile. It's where the past likes to ride. He reached up and cleaned the mirror with the corner of his sleeve. The glass gave him back a picture of the fuel island, the legs of a passing traveler, and a ribbon of highway that might as well have been yesterday. He merged onto the road and put the miles behind him the way he always did, one at a time, careful with each. Drivers who heard about Evan's night spoke of it the way they talk about a sudden song on the radio that fits the weather too well, or a sign they swear they saw that isn't there at noon. They nodded at the idea that a voice might travel differently after a long time, that help does not always care what year it is. The story is told as simple road logic: a voice on the wire, a warning, a way station, and an old name returning like a bird the season brings back without anyone asking. Evan kept the CB on after that. He didn't chase voices. He didn't test them. He kept it there like a door wedged open with a book, just enough to let in a draft. He learned the fog along the river from the inside out, and kept an eye for service roads in case the main line dreamed of stillness again. He kept his left mirror clean. He never adopted a handle. He never objected when someone used one for him. On the nights when the prairie opened, and the stars held steady, and the only company was the soft pulse of towers far away, he sometimes heard the barest suggestion of music under the static, a friendly thrum like wheels on evenly spaced seams. If a voice came through, it was not to frighten or to claim. It was to lay a hand on a shoulder without weight and say, in words as plain as a straight road, "Keep it steady. There's a bend up ahead. It looks like every other bend until it doesn't." Story number 2. They knew her by the way she treated the road, gentle on the throttle, precise in the mirrors, unhurried even when time pinched. Lena Ortiz liked night runs for the way the world simplified itself to a ribbon of light and a hum underfoot. On that night, with a refrigerated trailer running steady behind her and a cold, dry wind pressing across the high desert, she tracked east along a stretch that the map marked lonely. The sky had the clarity of glass. Stars showed themselves in hard little points. Somewhere beyond the black shoulders of the highway, cattle stands slept and fence posts took turns holding up the barbed wire. The signs for distant towns were small, the arrows patient. She kept her cab tidy, a thermos snug in its ring, a small stuffed fox her niece had insisted would keep her company, a spiral notebook clipped to the visor with a line drawn through the miles she had already put behind her. A faint citrus scent from a clipped-on air freshener hung in the air, just enough to keep the late hour from feeling stale. Her music was low. The fridge unit ticked, a soft heartbeat behind her. Around 1 in the morning, she came upon a portable signboard with amber letters strung across it. Dieter ahead, County Road, 17 amperes. The message blinked, then held. A smaller sign at the shoulder backed it up in reflective arrows. Trucks right. She'd been hearing about maintenance on the old bridge that crossed a narrow river out here, overnight closures to set new joints. Rebar like ribs being put back into concrete. She could take a detour. She had cushion in her schedule and a full tank. She signaled and moved into the right lane, obedient to the arrow's simple demand. The exit ramp swept her down toward the kind of road that seemed to apologize for existing. Narrow. Patched in rectangles, lined with cats. Eye reflectors that winked almost shyly when her lights touched them. A fresh orange barricade stood with its legs planted in gravel, and an arrow pointing to the right. County Road, 17 amperes, the sign said, in lettering that looked cleaner than any sign had a right to be out there. She turned. The change came quiet, less noise from the pavement, a different pitch in the tires, a slight hug from the center crown. Her GPS recalculated without complaint, and painted a neat orange line that looped alongside the highway, then rejoined it after the river. She drove into a blackness that sat very close to the beam of her headlights. The high desert spreads out like a thought that can't be finished, but here, shrubs clustered a little tighter, the ground came closer, and the sky lost a fraction of its size. She took her speed down until the world felt calm and sized for a person. The reflectors winked back in steady measure, like a pulse. She liked that things, in measure. 2 miles in, she passed a mailbox on a posts and chain stand with no house in sight. The name was silver on black and neatly placed, but when her light hit it, the silver didn't reflect so much as glow. She watched it go by in the right mirror and disappear into dark, like the thin syllable of a whispered word. Farther on, her low beams brushed a cattle gate. The sign wired to it had a bullet hole punched clean through the O in no. A rabbit darted and then froze in the far edge of her light, not trusting its next choice. Lena breathed out. There was no reason to be nervous. A detour is a detour anywhere longer, perhaps, but straightforward. You follow the arrows until they stop asking for your opinion. At the notch where 17 amperes rose and then let itself down into a small wash, the GPS voice, calm and new, suggested a right turn in half a mile. There was nowhere to turn. The map on the screen flickered once and then settled. She glanced and put it out of mind the way seasoned drivers set distractions in a tidy mental drawer. In the cab, the radio pulled in a station with the texture of tinfoil, thin, bright, barely musical. She clicked through until she found an AM broadcaster lining out needles in the haystack, talk about weather patterns and farm reports. You can learn useful things from farm reports if you're paying attention. Half an hour, maybe less. The solitude stretched in easy rhythm. She marked a few obvious landmarks without meaning to. A lone cottonwood leaning into the wind like it had decided to live that way. A pickup truck cab half swallowed by sand, with only its roof showing like a shark's fin. A billboard stub with a rectangle of sky where the advertisement had once held. It was a good habit. The way she kept track without making a project of it. When the first oddness came, it was polite. A mile marker white, fresh paint. 119 slipped by on the right. 3 minutes later, rolling steady at 45, another 119 caught her light. She frowned at the second one because it was too soon for another mile marker. Then a third 119, standing as straight and new as the first two, passed in a tidy succession of moments, as if the mile had become an echo. She checked her odometer. It ticked its ordinary little numbers without blinking at strange. The GPS map flickered again, and returned to the same orange route as if apologizing for a stutter. She tapped the dash with 2 fingers, reflex more than useful, and breathed out. Mile markers get doubled sometimes. Work crews replace them and forget to remove the old ones. An echo could be nothing more than replacement zeal. Still, her shoulders rose and held, as if waiting for a reason to drop again. The reflectors along the right shoulder began to blink in pairs, then trios, then pairs again, but not quite in sync with the spacing she knew eyes and posts should keep. No wind moved the scrub. There were no bugs batting their bodies against her glass. The radio shifted from farm talk to a baseball game called with the buoyant cheer of midsummer, though the fields outside were iron-colored and cold. The names of the teams were old, the kind of names you hear in stories, not in modern box scores. There was an advertisement for a gas brand she remembered from road atlases her father kept when paper still had the final say. The score hung stubbornly at 3-2, inning after inning, like a song stuck on a note. At the next rise, an old service station came into view with its canopy bright and pristine. A sign on the pole declared Hollow Bend Oasis in a font that was too friendly by half. The paint had no weather to it. The glow painted the pavement and the eaves, but not much else. It was the sort of brightness that stops at the edge of itself and doesn't go into the air. A vending machine stood against the wall with decals for soda flavors that had vanished from shelves years ago. The ice machine had a fresh sticker, neat blue letters that said ice, with the edges still crisp. No insects swarmed the fluorescent tubes. No diesel soot smudged the canopy's underside. A closed sign in the window tilted back and forth slightly without wind to urge it. Lena slowed enough to read the posted address on the door, because she liked addresses their particularity always anchored a place to the world. The numbers were familiar from some list she couldn't place. As she idled by, she noticed something small and unhelpful. The pump nozzles were hung just a hair too perfectly, their hoses draped in identical curves like repeated handwriting. She kept rolling. She didn't need fuel. She needed the world outside her windows to be honest. When the road bent right, it bent right the way it had before. She recognized the cottonwood leaning like a tired person standing in a long line. She saw the half-buried pickup's roof again. She could name the pattern of broken fence boards in the left ditch. The mile marker at the shoulder waited with its shy newness. 119. She drove by with her mouth pressed into a line, a tired little smile tacked on to keep the worry from getting ideas. 3 minutes later, another 119. She checked the time. The dash clock presented 1:44, as modest and bright as it had at the beginning of the detour. Her watch, reliable and analog, said 2:27. She tapped the watch crystal, then laughed at herself. Tapping tells time nothing. She switched the radio station. The baseball game kept finding her. The announcer described a foul ball drifting over third again, the way he had before, with the same cadence, as if he liked telling it. At the next pull-off, a gravel apron with a rusted cattle guard she eased over, put on her 4 ways, and sat for a breath. The quiet held. She could hear the fan in the sleeper and the light tick of her cooling brakes. Off in the darkness to the south, something like faint surf moved and paused again. No ocean lived there. She listened harder and understood it suddenly and completely. Highway, far off, too far to see, but there. 1,000 tires whispering over seams of expansion. She shut her engine off and waited with the windows cracked. The highway sound continued in the measured hush of a large thing moving in place. The detour kept its own breath, shallow and even. She climbed down with her reflective vest on, because there are rules you follow even when the night refuses to. Cold bit her fingers. The stars above her felt close enough to taste. The gravel under her boots knew her weight the way all ground knows a person who has walked long in the world. She took one of her safety triangles from the side box, snapped it open, and set it at the edge of the shoulder, its small mirrors catching her headlights like sparks. It looked ordinary. It made her feel better to look at something she could name and touch and fold again. She climbed back in and drove on. She noted the things that happened next in her mind the way you note items on a grocery list, so that they're there later when you need to reach for them. The triangle passed in her right mirror 8 minutes later. It did not look crushed or misplaced. It looked exactly how she had set it, a small bit of geometry bravely holding a place in the world. She let out a sound that could have been a laugh if it hadn't left her throat, with no humor attached to it. She was not looping some long detour's lazy U. She was circling inside something that wore a detour's clothes. Fear, like any tool, can be used carefully. She breathed in the exact way she had been taught to breathe through complicated turns in tight yards, counting the inflow, counting the outflow, letting muscle and mind arrive at the same place. She lowered her speed until her truck moved like an animal stalking rather than running. She turned the radio down low enough that it was more a line in the air than a sound, and listened for the big, real highway. On the third time the hollow bend oasis rose out of the dark, she eased over toward it not to pull in, but to read again what the brightness wanted her to do. The open sign had switched from dark to the sort of red that looks warm but gives no heat. The door had a small menu taped inside the glass, and the letters on the specials curled at the corners, as if they had been written with a good pen by someone who cared about penmanship. But the pen's ink was wrong sharp, not bled by time, as if it insisted on being new. The ice machine bore the same crisp sticker. The vending machine hummed at a pitch that made her fillings sing. A paper napkin on an outside table stirred slightly, then repeated the motion, then repeated it again, exactly identical each time. A pickup rolled up from the far side and stopped at pump 3. Its paint was clean in that ageless, dull way old trucks sometimes have when they've been in someone's garage more than in the Sunday. The man at the wheel wore a brimmed cap. He didn't look toward her. He looked into his rearview mirror, as if making eye contact with something there. His brake lights didn't come on. His truck made no sound. Somewhere deep in the part of her brain that believes what it believes, Lena knew that if she sought out his eyes, she would have to wear the look she found there for a long time, and she was not interested in carrying someone else's stare with her. She let the oasis pass. The GPS told her to turn right a quarter mile ago. The mile marker told her she was on the same exact mile she had been on 5 times now. The watch said 2:31 and kept going without apology. She thought of an older woman who had trained her when she was new to all this small, fierce, with a tan across her hands that never seemed to fade. "If you ever feel the road isn't the road," the woman had said, cracking the tab on a soda and staring out at a storm shivering in a far field, "make a new instruction, not a guess, a decision." People get hurt waiting for someone else to tell them what to do. She made a new instruction. At the next stretch where the shoulder widened just enough to pretend it was being helpful, she coasted. At 5 miles an hour, the rig rolled with a weighty kindness, every piece in it briefly remembering its own mass. She turned her headlights off. For 3 seconds, the world went to velvet. The stars pivoted into primary light. The reflectors along the right shoulder brightened, like a hallway someone had just lit. In that short, absolute night, she found the highway's breath again, true and big, a little left of where the detour pointed her eyes. She let the truck roll until the sound sat center, then eased the wheel, inch by inch, toward that place. The reflectors tried to insist. The GPS tried to describe a right turn where none waited. She kept the truck in the dark, eyes wide, trusting the way the crown of the road spoke up through the steering column. The hum under her hands deepened, then changed pitch. The median to her left was not a median anymore. It was a shallow ditch with nothing in it but winter grass and the silver flash of a distant can. Beyond it, darkness arranged itself in a different geometry. The sound of traffic, real, heavy, rolling, brushed her right to left and back again, once, twice, as if a hand had passed over her hair. She nudged the wheel left over the center line, as if she were persuading a large animal to step through a gate. The tires found gravel. Then the gritty packed line machines leave when they build a new shoulder. Then suddenly so familiar it made her eyes sting, striping that belonged to a highway too well used to look new. She flicked the lights on. White lines flowed under her, worn and confident. A green sign flashed by bearing the actual distance to the town she'd been aiming for hours ago. Road noise rose around her like applause. A convoy of cars hurtled past in the left lane, their drivers unaware that she had taken a different road out of a night that had put on a very convincing costume. She had always believed that the world ran parallel to itself sometimes, the way two songs can be sung over the same chords. She now believed it with her hands as well as her head. She drove 2 exits before she thought about her breath again. At the first well-lit truck plaza, she trusted not because it was perfect, but because it wore its use. Honestly, she pulled in and let the truck rest. The smell hit her in a wave of grounding: hot oil, coffee, wiper fluid, fried food, old carpet, the sweetness of distant cinnamon rolls that had been in their case too long. The fluorescent lights were unapologetic about attracting moths. The floor's scuffs told the story of 100 small drags and heavy boots. She went inside and stood under the air conditioning that didn't need to be on in winter, and let the noise fill all the space inside her that had been empty of sound. At the counter, a woman with a braid down her back like a rope nodded hello without examining her too closely. "Long night," she said with the friendliness of a person who knows that everyone's long night is particular. "Detour on 17A, Lena said, and watched the woman's eyes narrow, not in suspicion but in recognition. She had expected a laugh maybe, or a little complaint about road crews. She got neither. "There isn't one," the woman said gently. "Not lately. They fixed that bridge 5 years ago. You got signs? Portable boards, fresh arrows. County road signs looked like they'd just been unpacked." The woman poured coffee and slid it over. "You see a place called Hollow Bend?" Lena nodded. "You didn't go in?" "No." The woman nodded back as if they'd just shaken hands on something that mattered. "Good." Then, not as a warning, not as a scare, just as a piece of information set carefully where a person can find it if they need it. "My brother used to run nights up this way. Swore there's a loop over there that likes to catch people when the air's empty. He said it wasn't mean, just lonely. He always drove through with the radio off." She tapped the counter, a quick rhythm. "He said the trick was not to follow what's eager to be followed." Lena sipped coffee that was both too hot and exactly right, and let the talk pass over her like light through a clean window. Outside, her truck sat under a sodium vapor lamp that made the paint look a color it wasn't. The sound of tires on the real highway came and went, the kind of sound you stop listening for only when you're home. She ate, checked her tires because routines are the ropes you hold onto when a gust hits, and slept in her bunk with the curtain cracked just enough to see if morning would arrive in the ordinary way. It did gray first, then white, then a tone of blue that made the edges of things friendly again. She woke with the sensible ache of someone who had been tense in sleep and shook it off like dust. Later that day, with the sun high and the compass in her head pointed on as normal, she took the same exit just to look. Curiosity, when kept on a leash, is a good animal to walk. There were no portable signboards blinking detours, no fresh arrows on card legs at the curb. County Road 17 amperes existed, according to the green sign, but a chain crossed it with 3 polite emblems of the county ordinance and a phone number to call for permits. Grass grew up high between the tracks on the first few feet of asphalt beyond the chain. The mile marker 119 looked its age, sunburned and chewed a little at the edges, tilting as if considering a nap. She followed the frontage road to where a weathered listing frame of a service station had become a habitat for sparrows. On a fallen board, someone had scrawled Hollow Bend long ago, and the letters had taken on the soft look wood gives to paint when it wants to make it its own. The ice machine stood only as a rusted outline on dirty concrete, a square of cleanliness where it had protected the ground from Sunday. A vending machine lay on its face behind the building, rain carved into it a soft geography of its own. She didn't take a picture. She didn't need proof. She drove back to the main line and let the day do what days do without help hold itself up. She made her delivery on time and backed into the dock with a grace that pleased the yard hand. She slept that night in a motel with water that took a very particular amount of time to get warm and a television that insisted on the Weather Channel. The forecast was ordinary. She was grateful to hear it. It wasn't a story she told over counters, not for a long time. She did not like to be looked at like someone who wished to be spooky, but she told herself in small ways. By keeping a triangle within easy reach, by trusting that the highway is never shy, by turning the radio off if the same inning lasted more than one. When she finally did mention it to a man whose truck bore the pale ghosts of logos sanded off and whose eyes had the look of someone who sat a long time with weather, he didn't smile. He said, 17A, like the name of an old neighbor. You did right. Then he told her, as if offering a receipt, that once, years ago, he drove that circle until he was patient about it, until he could feel the way out the way you feel the difference between carpet and tile under your feet in the dark. Drivers tell the tale of a kind detour with its own time, a loop that tucks itself near a real road like a small town flanking a river, a place that sets its table for guests and repeats itself too exactly. Some say you can hear the true highway if you hush your noise and wait. Others say a place that longed to be helpful stayed helpful too long and forgot what help was. The caution is simple and quiet. Don't follow what's too eager to lead. If the signs look new where everything else looks tired, choose the older thing. Turn the lights off for 3 breaths, trust the shapes under your hands, and lean toward the sound of many lives moving in the same direction. Story number 3. They call it a gentle-sounding name on maps, Sable Pass. Though anyone who works it after midnight knows there's nothing gentle about 12 miles of downhill that keeps asking the same question. Are you sure? Malik Reyes had answered that question 100 times and liked the way his answer sounded when everything was tuned right. He ran a lowboy with a compact excavator chained down behind him, 44,000 pounds of obedient metal, the kind that pulls at your momentum on the way down like a dog that wants to trot when you're trying to walk. Malik was careful without being fussy. He kept his gear bag neat, his log tight, his mirrors clean enough to return the world without commentary. He had a habit of humming when numbers were involved. Grade percentages, gear ratios, exit numbers. The hum kept the edges smooth. He drank plain coffee and liked the quiet bruise color of mountain nights. His truck's engine brake had a note he trusted the way people trust a friend's voice. On the night this story lives, snow hung back in the shady cuts like forgotten laundry, and the wind up high threaded the pines with a soft single note. The climb on the west side was uneventful. In that satisfying way, a good pull can be long, seated, steam rising from sunken pockets in the rock, where last week's weather still evaporated into this week's air. Trucks ghosted past going the other direction, their marker lights stringing themselves into necklaces on the black. At the summit turnout, a sign the color of caution read, steep grade, next 12 miles, 6%. Another, more blunt, added, trucks check brakes. Malik pulled into the brake check like he always did. There's pride in not needing to stop. There's also pride in doing the smart thing. He stepped down into air that tasted like iron and pine. The sky wore a dusting of stars, as if someone had tipped a jar. He walked the trailer, laid his palm on cool steel, tugged each chain and binder with a practiced rhythm. He crouched to look at the drums and linings the way you look into the eyes of someone you're about to dance with. Are we about to agree on the steps? Under the brake check's laminated instructions, chalk wheels before adjusting, test air loss, someone had pressed a thumb-sized sticker onto the metal panel. The sticker bore a simple phrase in block letters, third holds, fourth, forgets. He almost peeled it off, the way you remove graffiti from a tidy place. He left it. A lot is written in places like that, most of it nonsense. A little of it is true in a way that only makes sense when your hands are at a wheel. Back in the cab, he slid the transmission into low, then up through the crawl gears until the truck responded with a settled posture. He kept it in third. The engine brake in stage 1 made a sound like a deep breath held and released gently. He eased over the edge. The first slope accepted him. Pines stood with their black arms folded. Reflective signs stepped back as he passed. The stripes under his lights were clean and new from early season maintenance. He settled at 28, then a hair less, watching the needle sit where he asked it to sit. 3 lanes wide down to 2 and then squeezed by rock. The pass drew him shoulder-width close to the mountain on his right. Far left, beyond a barrier strong as a promise, the world fell away into emptiness that had its own weather. He passed the first of the tunnels short, brick-lined, with a date in neat tiles over the crown that said 1936, like a stitched name in a sweater. The sound changed as he went through, the engine's note taking on a softer middle as the stone threw it back. In the tiles to his right, he glimpsed his truck in shallow reflection, a rush of light, a long rectangle, a wink of marker lamps, nothing strange. The tile was too dull for real mirrors. On the downslope beyond, a variable message board blinked a message about chain control on the east approach for those foolish enough to be climbing tonight. His direction was clear. 2 miles in, with the grade now steady at 6, and the turns beginning their deliberate cadence, something red came into being on the road ahead. 2 brake lights, far down, then far closer than they should have been if you were being sensible. There's that mountain question again. Are you sure? Then settling at a distance that didn't match his memory of where a lead truck ought to sit on a night like this. The red was a warmer red than modern LEDs give, a color old bulbs used to show. He watched it with the part of his mind that always keeps an eye open for the unexpected. The lights ahead brightened when his foot held steadier, dimmed when he feathered the foot brake. He frowned, thinking of coincidence, then tapped his marker lights once the way you tap a table to mark a beat. Up ahead, the markers on the truck blinked in easy sympathy. He felt his scalp tighten under his cap in an almost pleasant wave that was half fear and half the thrill of having a clear mystery to work on. The red ahead was not another driver. The red ahead was a version of him that his truck was making by mistake or by design. Mirrored isn't exactly right. Shadowed isn't either. Echoed. Maybe. He breathed. The gray didn't get any lighter, because the world had decided to be poetic. The second tunnel was longer. The date over it read 1959, and the tilework had a hospital cleanliness to it that has nothing to do with actual cleanliness and everything to do with choices made long ago about light. In that bright tube, the reflective panels to the right worked like shallow water. In them, he saw his truck slightly delayed, rippling, and there, a detail that didn't belong. A shape sat in the passenger seat, as if someone had leaned in without moving the curtain. A hat, the rounded suggestion of a shoulder. The shape didn't move. Malik glanced at the empty seat beside him. The thermos sat in the cup holder. A folded atlas lay under it because he liked paper even when his phone could do the job quicker. No one sat there. He looked back to the tiles just long enough to make the certain kind of mistake curiosity likes to suggest. The shape was still there. He put his eyes on the road and kept them there when the tunnel released him into starlight again. Third held. He kept the engine brake on the softest setting, taking each curve with the kind of careful arc you draw when you're tracing something you don't want to damage. The grade did what grades do, reminded him of gravity's patience, the way it never gets tired of reaching for you. The hydraulics hummed. The excavator's tracks tugged and settled. He checked his air. He checked the thermometer. He checked the speed again and again, until it felt like a number he was wearing rather than reading. At the halfway turnout, an orange diamond sign leaned into his lights. It had been turned sideways by some prankster, or by a wind that hadn't meant mischief but made it anyway. The sign read bump, when read properly. Sidways, the letters looked like a message in a language that hurt your eyes. He didn't like the feeling of his brain working on letters that way. He let it go. Up ahead, the echo lights did a small bright brighten, as if they too were adjusting to a jolt. Old-timers in mountain towns will tell you that certain sections of road have a memory like an old house stairs that creak in the same place, no matter what shoes you're wearing. Sable Pass has a section called the Mirror Mile by certain drivers who never met each other and yet use the same phrase without arranging it. For reasons no one sends to the Department of Transportation, so they can be immortalized in bulletins, vehicles here sometimes pick up a reflection of their own future or their own recent past. The trick is not to make too much of it. The danger is doing exactly that. On the far slope to his left, he saw an older alignment of the highway, the way a seam in a suit shows where the tailor had let fabric out once upon a time. Concrete slabs lay broken as checkers, their rebar knitting threaded through the empty air in careful rust. The old road looked like something that had decided to relax after decades of holding itself too straight. Some stories said a driver had once taken that old alignment by mistake in a storm and found a version of the past that had never been finished. Other stories said people like to tell stories. The third tunnel, the long one, bore the name Gower in metal letters that had gone dull. A plaque at its western mouth carried a carved dedication that might have been meaningful at noon. At 2 a.m., it looked like an invitation to think about names on stone. Inside, the tile reflections slicked themselves up again, the echo light slotted in front of him, exactly the distance you'd give to a truck whose driver knows what they're doing. The figure in the passenger seat reappeared, like a smudge your eyes insist on making when you stare at anything too long. Malik found himself humming, not for numbers now, but to draw a line through the silence he could follow. Midway through Gower, the catwalk above the right lane held a pale glow from the emergency boxes. The light was a meager, official kind of hope. In his side vision, a metal door marked Refuge 3 wore scratches around its handle like rings from fingers. He heard, and did not precisely hear, 3 slow knocks somewhere in the stone. He did not look up. He knew the sound that could lead a person off their own line. He kept his palms open on the wheel and let the knock pass through him the way a distant train sound passes through a night window. As he rolled out of the east mouth of Gower, wind swung down the cut with the cool, damp smell of water unseen. The world unclenched by an inch. Not more. The echo lights brightened, then dulled, as if feeling the same wind. The sign after the tunnel, one of those new digital panels that can ask anything from buckle up to be kind to work crews, glowed in amber. Stay in the lane you chose. Malik surprised himself by saying, 10-4, aloud to no one. Third held, fourth forgets. The sticker at the brake check, the sign, the small knock within the mountain's ribs. He put these things in a row like stones across a creek and stepped on them one by one with his thoughts to test their steadiness. Temptation on grades is a soft voice. You're fine, she says. You're over-braking. A little more speed and everything gets easier. The needle was steady. The curves kept arriving with a school teacher's consistency. Part of his foot, the part that thinks about comfort long before it thinks about wisdom, wanted to ease a little more fuel into the cylinders. Let the truck feel lighter for a breath. His thumb hovered near the shifter paddle, a touch away from adding a gear. The echo lights ahead did something they hadn't done yet. They moved as if he had already made the choice he hadn't made. They brightened and stayed bright a beat too long. The brake glow looked like a held breath that doesn't get exhaled soon enough. He took his thumb away. He felt the small, ridiculous sting of having been seen making a mistake before he made it caught by his own reflection. He grinned, not for humor, but because the seriousness of it was too big to wear unadorned. Not tonight, he said, and the engine brake murmured its approval. The runaway ramps announced themselves 3 times as pale beaches of gravel snuggled into the mountainside. Their signs spoke in the simple pamphlet language of their purpose. Use low gear. Brake failure. Use ramp. He touched the thought as you touch the railing of a staircase, not because you plan to fall, but because you know how gravity works. He saw tire tracks scribed into the gravel, separate lines that had been hurried and frightening for someone and were now just grooves. The echo lights ahead did not take the ramps. They stayed steadier than he felt. That bothered him in a way he didn't bother to fix with words. At mile marker 235, a number he noted because he liked the feel of it, an old brake turnout sat stubby and almost embarrassed in the rocks. It had been useful once, then partially filled in when the new shoulder made it redundant. The entrance was sharp. The sign in front of it declared, "No stopping except emergency," which is a way of saying, be very certain if you choose to be here. Malik had the sudden thought that stepping aside, briefly, would break his habit of matching the echo. He had not done that, not with his eyes, not with his feet. He had matched without meaning to. The mountain had offered him a turn he could choose, not because a manual told him to, but because a human thing inside him saw a shape in a problem and chose to make a different shape. He signaled with a politeness no one but him would notice and feathered the brakes a touch more, reading the trailer in the mirror, reading the space, reading the slope of gravel like a sentence he didn't want to mispronounce. He rolled into the old turnout at 6 miles an hour and let the truck come to a thoughtful halt. He kept his foot firm. He did not set the brake, because the grade was still talking to him even if his wheels were still. He counted to 10. At 5, the echo lights went on ahead without him, brightened as if he had done something he had not, and then, with no drama, vanished into the next turn, as if swallowed by a darker piece of night. He exhaled. He let the truck be a quiet room for a breath. The excavator behind him settled that small amount heavy machinery settles when it realizes it does not have to be ready, not this second. He eased out, eased down, kept the angle of his vector shallow like a skier reading the snow, and put his wheels back on the main line. It felt like stepping back onto a moving walkway you left on purpose, and now knew how to stand on. The grade took him up again, which is to say the grade kept taking him down. From there, the pass flattened its hand a little at a time, and before he could name the moment, the percentage was a suggestion rather than a demand. Signs began to talk about services, food, fuel, the comfort of things that open their doors to the sunrise. The black shape of the mountain pulled itself away from his window. The valley flickered back into being, not so much appearing as remembering to be visible. When the grade was behind him, he felt it in his shoulders like the release you get when you find the word you were reaching for. He pulled into a big travel center at the bottom, with a parking lot that had seen everything twice and kept its temper. The night down here had a different temperature, softer, the way a garage holds on to warmth even when the air outside is patient with cold. A handful of other rigs idled, their own descents written in dust on their steps, and in the precise way they were parked a fraction straighter than tired men park. Inside, the fluorescents hummed with confidence. A television spoke in the corner to no one about weather 2 states away. The woman behind the counter wore a sweatshirt with a faded logo, and the expression of someone who knows all the ways a night can go and is ready for each of them. "You made the hill," she said lightly, as if congratulating him on a game he hadn't told her he was playing. "I made the hill," he echoed, allowing himself the small pleasure of the repetition. "There's coffee that tastes like coffee, and coffee that tastes like coffee if you pretend," she said, pointing. "Up to you how much imagination you've got left." He chose the pot that smelled real and sipped like someone testing hot soup. A man at a corner table raised his chin in that truck stop. Hello that doesn't interrupt thought. His hair had gone silver at the edges, and his hands had the lumps of a mechanic's. "You from up top just now?" he asked without making a project of it. "Yeah. See your own brake lights?" the man asked, half joking, half not. Malik laughed, a sound that folded his tension and put it away. "Something like that." The man nodded, not surprised. "Mirror Mile," he said, as if he were naming a town. "Sometimes she shows you the line you're on. Sometimes she shows you a line you left, or a line you should leave. Tricks not to mistake one for the other. Old crews say the tile in Gower holds a brighter shine because it remembers every light it ever saw and wants to give one back now and then. Sounds like a thing tile would do." He took a slow drink. "You stayed in third." Malik smiled despite himself. "Like the sticker said." "What sticker?" "Brake check up top." The man shrugged. "Never seen a sticker. I've seen drivers nail a crew-built sign at the bottom that says the same thing in different words." He stood, stretched with a careful man's carefulness. "Mountains ask you a question. You answered it. It's the kind of exchange that doesn't need a bow." Malik ate, washed his hands of the particular grit that comes off steering wheels and levers, and sat a while in the soft anonymity you only get at 3 a.m., in a place that stays open because it wants to. When he stepped back outside, the sky was a little thinner with darkness. He walked the trailer again because that was the answer he liked to give any time a grade was behind him. Metal, chain, pin, line. He touched each with his fingers and named it in his mind. He put a palm flat on the hood for a second. The engine ticked its cooling song. Later, when daylight had fully taken back the details of the pass, he climbed the east approach empty to fetch another load and looked at the places where the night had moved differently. The sticker at the brake check was gone, or had never been there. The variable sign read nothing more magical than Work Zone A had merge early. The sideways bump sign stood straight, as if someone with a wrench and an attachment to order had passed by. In the tunnel tiles, he saw only reflections that behaved like reflections. He listened, briefly, for 3 knocks. He heard, properly and only, the steady patter of his own tires, sending small conversations into the stone. He did not become a man who talks about this sort of thing at every opportunity. It wasn't that he doubted it or doubted himself. It was that the road is full of people who want to be believed. He wanted to be specific instead. He kept the habit the mountain taught him. At the top of Sable Pass, He would press his thumb once against the base of the shifter, not as a charm, but as a way to say, third holds, fourth forgets. He would keep the lane he chose. He would notice any red ahead that brightened when his foot did, and if the moment came when he needed to step aside to stop imitating a future he didn't like, he would take the turnout and wait, while a ghost version of his own night continued without him. Drivers who run that way will sometimes tell a friend about a stretch of road that gives a person back their own light to study. They say it's not unkind, that it is, in fact, a precise sort of rescue offered by the mountain to anyone who can be taught by a lesson that arrives in the quiet language of repetition. They say if you hear 3 knocks in Gower, you should respect them and drive, not investigate. They say if a sign seems to read your mind, let it. None of this is official. None of it is posted, but in the miles where stone holds and guides and your brakes are as much faith as metal, it doesn't hurt to accept that the world sometimes brings you yourself a few seconds early and invites you to consider whether you like what you see. Story number 4. The coastal highway after midnight has a patience that doesn't exist at noon. The ocean breathes slow. Pines hold their shadows close. The road's paint, salted and weathered, shines like a line drawn with a wet brush. Rhea Park liked this stretch exactly for those reasons. She ran a flatbed tonight, Kyline dried lumber banded in neat stacks, 6 straps laying over the load like quiet hands. The air had that ocean metal taste that made everything feel clean even when it wasn't. She left the mill a little later than planned. A crane had argued with a relay, and the load didn't settle right on the first try. Now the clock tucked itself against 1 in the morning. She didn't mind. The coastal 2-lane kept good secrets, but not dangerous ones on nights like this. Foghorns out in the bay spoke every so often, as if waking themselves up. Her dash glowed a soft amber, old school and easy on the eyes. She kept her speed domestic. She had learned long ago that hurry made the miles longer, not shorter. Up ahead, a turnout with a broken fence and a view of black water opened like a small polite hand offering a pause. She eased off, set her brake gently like someone closing a door so it won't bang, stepped down into the damp. The air held just enough chill to make the coffee from her thermos feel like an answer. She walked once around the truck, tapping the straps, checking the edge protectors where the nylon met wood. The lumber gave off a faint sweet smell in the cold like a memory of summer stacked in tidy inches. When she climbed back in and flipped the wipers to swipe the thin salt film off her glass, she saw it. A square of paper under the driver's side blade. Plain, off-white, the kind of cardstock you buy for recipes. The corner had taken on the hint of the moisture in the air and curled a little. She found the edges with her fingers. It was dry enough to read. Use low beams after mile 63. The bridge eats highlight. The handwriting was neat, unadorned. Not loopy, not blocky. Just regular letters that looked written by a person who doesn't think about handwriting at all. She looked out to where the road laid down its ribbon again. Bridges out here came in green-painted steel and concrete with eelgrass clinging to the uprights. She had crossed them all, high beams and low, without superstition, but the card sat calm in her hand. The ink didn't run. The words weren't dramatic. She raised the wiper, slid the square under the rubber strip again without quite knowing why, and pulled back onto the road. Mile 63 announced itself in reflective white that looked like someone had just polished only that number. The arch ahead rose up out of the fog, an old latticework that once felt fancy to a county crew. She clicked to low beams. The change was immediate and sensible. On high, the fog had been a wall. On low, it became a room with the lights turned the right way. The great deck sang under the tires, a soft metal hum like a cat purring at a distance. Thin fog flowed in 2 half-invisible sheets at fender height, one returning toward her, one slipping away, and the world held. The phrase on the note landed in her mind with the weight of a small truth. Highlight, low light. Some things don't want brightness, they want care. On the far side, the road shouldered through spruce and alder. The trunks pale in the light, lichens lifting their dry beards toward the damp. A radio station from a town that smelled like nets and diesel reached in with a few songs and then lost its footing. An advertisement found her twice. The same voice promised cinnamon donuts, warm at 4 in the morning, at a place with a smiling lighthouse on its sign. The voice sounded hopeful in a way that made her like it and feel sorry for it at once. She came upon a cardlock fuel island with the lights on and the office dark. The bay of the sky above it glowed a softer blue from the fixtures, a little oasis in longer dark. She didn't need much fuel, but the needle liked being paid attention to. She rolled in, took the nozzle, and listened to the pump click and sigh. The wind had gone soft. A flag on a short pole did nothing but hang. She stood there tasting salt on her lips and breathed in and out. Slow. The way you do so, the muscles in your neck, remember, they are allowed to rest. Back in the cab, the driver's side wiper lifted the way it always lifted, honest and reluctant. Under it, another square. The letters had been made by the same hand. Check the second strap back, driver's side. It's sleeping wrong. She felt the frown on her face before she arranged it. She set the card on the dash and got out with her flashlight. The second strap back on the driver's side lay a degree flatter than it had when she'd left the mill. Not loose exactly, just too comfortable. The way a belt can be a notch too kind after a long dinner. The protector had shifted a half-inch off the corner of the lowest bundle. She could have driven an hour, 2, 10, without trouble. She could also make it right. She put on the blue glove she kept in the door pocket for cold straps and cinched the ratchet, one careful click at a time, until the webbing had the right taut hum. She adjusted the edge guard back to perfect. The sound the strap made when she thumped it with her knuckles returned the correct note. She tried not to think about the second card and thought about it a great deal. No one had been around. The office was dark. The tick of the pump and the far hush of the surf had been the only noises. The air hadn't shifted in that way it does when someone new arrives. She looked once at the empty road, not expecting to see anyone, and not seeing anyone. The highway beyond the fuel island settled into habit again. A blinking yellow at a T intersection asked her to notice it, and then returned to its own blinking. A carved wooden bear holding a fish, one of those roadside items that exist because people like to know where they are, stood under a light that turned the varnish into caramel. The foghorn out in the bay sounded exactly when she took the bend near mile 68, as if the boat knew her personal schedule. The world can feel conspiratorial when you're tired, and it is kind. Another turnout. Another view of black water stitched with a line of white where waves broke against the hidden stones. She slid in, not to get out this time, but to see if the night had more messages under her wiper. The wipers looked back at her. Ordinary. A drop of condensation formed and fell from the rubber and left a small, clean stripe on the glass. She sat there long enough to decide she'd imagined the neatness of the notes, and then long enough to decide you don't imagine something that exact. She told herself the first note was a courtesy someone left for anyone. She told herself the second was a coincidence that happened to be specific. When she rolled again, the card she hadn't seen arrived. Turn out with the chainsaw, bear. Wait 2 minutes. Don't take Old Wharf. Count the buoys while you wait. Her laugh started and then dissolved. The letters didn't ask. They didn't warn. They told. She could ignore the card and take the Old Wharf Road, which cut a mile off if you believed maps, and had a hairpin at the bottom that could pinch a conscience on a wet night. The county had spent years promising to fix drainage there and had gone about it the way counties go about things. She put her signal on at the bear and eased into the gravel in time to watch a sedan roll past, sleepy and silver. She turned her radio off, as if that could make the night louder in a helpful way. 2 minutes is a long time when you've been told to do nothing with it. Her clock made small, polite sounds of keeping time, and the ocean punctuated the dark with its push and pull. Out on the black surface, 3 buoys blinked their negotiated colors in a rhythm that made sense if you knew the rules of navigation lights. A gull held the top of one buoy like a piece of punctuation. She counted their cycle. 1, 2, 3, and back again. On the road below the Old Wharf turn, antlers floated through the fog like a crown with no head. A line of elk crossed quiet as a migrating thought, large, empty of hurry, as attached to their decision as she was to hers. They disappeared into the brush one after another, feet making no more sound than a finger brushed over a paper napkin. She thought, because everyone thinks it when something friendly happens at just the right time. Thank you. The card didn't answer. She put the truck in gear and went on. The lighthouse that wasn't a lighthouse rose up around the headland. Its beams swung with the slow theatricality of a local stage show. It wore the right shape, if a person were drawing from memory, a white column, a hat of a lantern room, a lacy rail. A donut ad came through the static again with the exact intonation as before, every syllable in its proper place. Not because that's how ads are, but because she recognized the melody now. The card under the wiper waited for her to notice it when the blade swept. When the ad plays twice in a row, look left. The lighthouse on the bluff is not the lighthouse. She obeyed the words because they felt like a string tied around her finger. She looked left. The white column was not a lighthouse's column if you'd seen enough of them. It was a sheet metal casing around a radio tower painted to look like nostalgia. The beacon that swung was mounted on a truck crane parked just behind the fake lighthouse, doing night work for a survey crew in the fog. The real lighthouse sat farther out on a smaller rock, lower, its lens slow and plain. She smiled at the way the world sometimes dresses itself up and then needs to be reminded of its own clothes. She corrected her assumption and corrected her line. A one-lane control light held the next stretch, where the road leaned against the cliff and let one direction go at a time. The red eye glowed in mist. A hand-lettered sign taped to the pole said, "Pilot car and 5 men." She pulled to the line. Seagrass turned silver in her headlights. Insects, how were there insects in this cold? Made small, brave arcs through her beam. The wiper lifted. The square under it looked as if it had always been there. Go on green if the gull leaves the post. If the gull doesn't leave, wait even if it goes green. A gull had taken the post like it owned it. It looked as if the post had grown a gull. The bird's eye, when it turned, had the considered look of a creature that knows a great deal about patience. The light went green. The gull stayed. Her foot, trained by signs and habits and the way lights usually mean what they mean, tensed. She did not move. The second green came and went. Her trailer sighed in that way loads sigh when your foot doesn't do what you've trained it to do. On the third cycle, a pilot car came around the bend from the other side, headlights low and soft like something apologetic. The driver rolled her window down and laughed a little, not unkind. "Control box keeps forgetting which side it's on," she called. "Glad you waited. Come after me." The gull lifted then, as if it had only been punching a time card. It disappeared into a piece of air that remembered being daylight. By the time she crested the long hill beyond the control, the pile of squares on her dash had grown. None of them had big drama in them. Do not stop on the green bridge near the crown. The wind makes a promise there it cannot keep. Pay attention to the third seam in the pavement after mile 72. It runs across and wants your tire. Take the inside of the curl past the rock that looks like a sleeping seal. The gravel on the outside is up to something. She obeyed. She personalized the words as if whoever had written them just to see if she would say yes. The cardstock had a soft texture like paper for drawing. The ink had a warmth to it. She breathed into her fingers now and then, just to make sure they were still her fingers. By degrees, her questions turned from, "Who is doing this?" to, "How am I going to be polite back?" The question brought its own quiet. Politeness can be a cord you hold in your hand. She pulled into a turnout near an old uplift of rock that people stopped to name. A coin-operated binocular on a metal stalk stared at the night as if it wore it like a hat. A wooden box, about the size of a lunch pail, had been bolted to the railing at some time. Its paint was the color of rain. A metal label on it said "Tide Tables," and, below that, "Please return." She undid the latch. Inside, instead of tide tables, lay a neat stack of recipe cards and a pencil worn short. There was a card on top. The handwriting matched the others. If the night helped, help the night. Rhea stood with the pencil between her fingers and felt the simple verse of the road settle in her chest. She wasn't the sort to write signs for strangers. She didn't leave notes on people's cars. She liked doing a job well and sleeping after, but she also liked the kindness of small things that asked nothing big in return. She wrote, "Use low beams after mile 63. The bridge eats high light." She paused, looking at the line she had lived an hour ago, and felt the peculiar tilt the mind feels when time seems to be folding neatly in a drawer. She copied the strap advice, left the gull note, kept the buoy line short, made the warning about the green bridge plain. She didn't try to be poetic. She tried to be useful. When she was done, she tucked the cards in a small rubber-banded stack and set them aside in the box where a person who knows would find them. The pencil left a small gray smear on her thumb. She liked the way that looked. It told the truth of what she had just done. On the far side of the next headland, the long steel drawbridge across the bay began its low hymn. The decks grating under tires made a sound like strings being brushed. fog flowed along the rails. The grating carried puddles that looked deeper than they are. Some part of her mind, the part that likes to show a person all possible dangers in quick sequence, tried to tell her the darker square in the center was a hole. A card lifted its head under her wiper. Keep to the middle. The dark panel is only wet. Do not swerve. Do not break. She kept to the middle. The panel shone black like polished onyx, and then became simply grating and water again. On the far side, the road rose to meet a small high place where you could see the lights of the town nestling itself against the water's edge. The sign for the donut place with the smiling lighthouse, not a real lighthouse, she would never mistake that again, announced "Hot Now" in red letters that had a hopeful tilt. She wanted one, and didn't. She wanted to sleep and couldn't yet. She wanted to thank someone, and had. She pulled into a diner that had glass block corners and a neon clock that might have belonged to another century, and then decided to stay here because it liked the wall. Inside, a counter ran the length of the room, and a pie case held pies in the sorts of flavors that keep their dignity after midnight. Apple, lemon, something with a brown sugar name. The man behind the counter wore a white short-sleeve shirt with a pen in the pocket, and a look that said he was a person who let others talk first. "Coffee?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "And thank you." "Long night?" he asked without asking why. "Good night," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Good is rare at this hour," he said. He topped the cup like he had been pouring coffee into cups the exact shape of hers for so long that his wrist had the motion memorized. "You come through often?" "You come through often?" "Often enough." He nodded at the window. "Some nights this stretch writes back," he said. "That's what my mother used to say. She'd drive the old wagon for the marina. She swore the road would keep her company when she had too many crab pots and not enough rope. She left notes in the tide table box. Folks would come in here and leave mine on the door with pushpins. Little useful lines. Not the kind of thing that makes you talk loud. The kind of thing that lets you work." Rhea felt her shoulders settle down a notch they hadn't needed to be up. She took a bite of toast that tasted exactly like toast should. She could taste the ocean in it, and the butter that had been left at room temperature long enough to be kind. Back in the cab, the cards on her dash had curled a little at the corners. She tucked them into her logbook like leaves, not to keep as trophies, but because paper is a rhythm keeper. She drove the last miles to the warehouse in town and backed against the dock on the first try because she had slapped the mirror out of habit with a knuckle and her hand had remembered it could trust itself. Inside the building, someone signed her bill and handed it back with a sleepy flourish. The lumber came off with squeaks and small thunks and the soft thud of wood meeting wood. She slept in her bunk while gulls made editorial comments to each other on a roof somewhere. The town woke, and truck tires hissed through morning wet. When the sun decided to act like a planet again, she woke, bought a donut from the place with the smiling not lighthouse, and drove back out to the turnout with the tide table box. She checked the latch. Inside, the cards she'd written had shifted as if a hand had looked through them and chosen. New cards lay there, written in the same regular hand as hers and not hers at all. Stop at the turnout after the curve with the bent sign if the wind hits the truck broadside twice. It's only a squall turning the corner. Give it space. It will spend itself. If the radio station tells you about halibut 3 times in 10 minutes, it's high tide at Steelhead Bend. Slow down. Folks pull over suddenly to see water, doing what water does. She left the latch. She left the box. She walked back to the cab with the donut, in a bag that had already picked up a transparency from the grease. The ocean breathed. Pines held shade in their needles like a currency you don't spend all at once. The road waited the way a road waits. Not impatient, not eager, simply there, like a sentence that will still mean what it means whenever you return to read it. She kept the habit after that. She carried a small pack of cards and a pencil with an eraser that smudged just a little. She wrote down the sort of advice that doesn't make a person feel like a fool, things about lights, about wind, about where the fog likes to sit and where it doesn't. Sometimes she tucked one under her own wiper when the night felt chatty, an odd courtesy that made the next hour fit better. Sometimes she took cards from the tide table box and left her own in their place. Sometimes, on ordinary nights when everything behaved in its lane, she didn't even look in the box and drove on with the calm that comes from knowing something is there if you need it. Drivers who worked that coast began to mention it to each other, not as a campfire tale, but the way you might speak of a reliable station with clean restrooms, There's a turnout with a box if you're tired, and the fog decides to show its shoulders. Stop and see if the night has something for you. They said if a square of paper turned up under your wiper at a quiet place, it wasn't a trick. It was a kindly convention the road kept with those who traveled it. Maybe it had been going on for 50 years. Maybe it started with Rhea the evening she wrote the first one. Maybe it had been waiting for someone to write anything at all. Maybe the road didn't care, and simply liked being noticed. Near the end of that, in winter, after a week of rain had made the green darker and the rock shine in a way that made her want to close one eye against it, she came to the green bridge again with fog layered the way blankets layer in a cold house. She clicked to low beams where the card had told her months ago. A square under her wiper lifted its corner. She left it there and drove with it just out of sight. She didn't need to read it. She already knew what it would say. It would say the clear, exact thing at the exact right time. Story number 5. On the plains where the land lies down and breathes in long, even motions, the night wears red marks on its horizon. Tall broadcast towers, spaced like stitches in a seam, blink their warning lights in a steady metronome that makes a driver feel the earth has a pulse. Noah Mercer liked those lights. He ran them like tempo. Paper rolls filled his trailer, fat cylinders strapped low and true, their weight comforting in the way a heavy blanket is comforting. He had a gentle foot and a drummer's habit thumb and forefinger tapping the wheel in quiet patterns no one heard but him. The run was a straight line threaded from one state to the next, a river made of asphalt with no bends the map bothered to draw. Stars crowded the sky. A wind farm turned its blades in polite, slow circles. His dash wore old analog dials with needles that never felt the need to dramatize their work. The radio made and unmade stations in long breaths. He kept the CB quiet unless the weather got ideas. He let the night be simple, and the night, for a while, let him. Out there, the towers usually blinked in time, long on, long off. The kind of rhythm you can put your tired mind in and let it rock. But as he cleared a county line and the road took a shallow dip through a dry riverbed, Noah saw it tilt. The nearest stack of red lights blinked once, twice, quick. Farther off, 2 towers answered with one long blink and a pause, out of step. Up the line, a third matched the quick pair, and a fourth stayed loyal to the old. Slow beat like a stubborn drummer in a band that wanted a new song. The pattern took shape in his eye before it decided to settle. He felt his fingers change their count without a decision attached. He told himself with the easy politeness people say for their own unease that it was an electronics thing, a grid hiccup, some engineer somewhere nudging a phase. He could accept that. The lights kept at it, though 2 short blinks on the left edge of the world, a longer hold on the right, pause, repeat. He eased his speed down 5 miles an hour, not because he was spooked, he told himself, but because the road always feels truer when you take your time asking it questions. At the Dry Rivers Bridge, the deck showed its open slots, the kind meant to flex in summer and freeze in winter. A gust came through sideways, a kind, warning kind of push, the kind that asks you whether your hands are paying attention. The 2 short blinks got there first, then the actual wind, as if the towers had told him, brace. He gave the wheel exactly enough to show he was listening. The trailer shouldered dutifully, paper rolls settled in their confidence. He breathed and thought of nothing. He rolled out of the dip. Flatness stretched again like a long thought. On the radio, a weatherman spoke in the tone of someone encouraging a sleeping pet to move a little on the couch. Chance of fog near drainage. Possibility of patchy drift at mile markers you could only see in daylight. Noah let that drift into the background. In his right mirror, a scatter of lights from a grain elevator tracked him, tidy as piano keys. In his left, the emptiness had a softness to it, a felt darkness rather than a hard one. The next oddness was a little joke the road played that no one else could hear. Up ahead, a harvest convoy, the kind with a pickup in front and a combine riding high on a trailer, wore its own string of amber lights. The towers 3 miles beyond them blinked twice quick, then lay dark, then blinked again, like a heartbeat. The combine's driver tapped his brakes once for the narrow place ahead, and Noah's hands moved in advance because the beat on the horizon had already told him to widen his patience. He did, and a pronghorn slithered under the guardrail and went across the lanes the way pronghorns do, committed and elegant, and without consulting anybody. It was gone in 3 seconds. His heart took longer than that to settle back down where it belonged. 2 exits later, He took a turnout with a cast-iron trash barrel and a map kiosk whose glass had a crack like a dry river. The air felt good when he stepped into it. It tasted faintly of rain that had made a plan and then changed its mind. He walked the trailer like he always walked the trailer. Hand on strap, eye on corner, boot scuffing gravel in small, even sounds. A moth tipped around the light over the kiosk like a tiny drunk. On the inside of the map case, someone had pinned a photocopy of an article from a local paper, the ink going a little lavender as it aged. Synchronization test for tower beacons scheduled this month, the headline read. Beneath it, some lines about phase timing and safety for aircraft, about clocks and controllers and the way big systems like to keep time. In pencil, under the formal paragraphs, a hand had left a note in the margin. 2 short weather, 3 short road. Long hold stop pretending you're not seeing it. He smiled at the joke, and at the earnestness tucked inside the joke. He smoothed the paper with the flat of his palm and went back to the cab thinking of metronomes, and of how drummers sometimes count for people without making a big show of it. Past midnight, when the miles are careful not to wake anyone, and even the semis look drowsy in their mirrors, the world went a shade quieter than quiet. He didn't notice it arrive. He noticed it by what disappeared. The hum, that comfortable, layered hum of tires on aggregate, the thin brush of wind on mirror brackets, the low inland ocean sound from the reefer units of other trucks, thinned until it felt like cotton stretched too far. The radio lost the farm report without finding anything else. The blink pattern on the towers didn't falter. It vanished all at once, the whole long seam going dark. His dash remained itself. The needles kept doing their job. His headlights spooled their twin cones along the road with obedient brightness. But the horizon emptied like a theater after a final bow. For one long breath, the world forgot to make background. He put his thumb and first finger together and counted, steady and slow. 1, 2, 3, 4, to 60, and then another 60, and another. Somewhere in the second minute, the headlights seemed to press against a texture that was more than air and not quite fog. His tires told him subtle things, a different pitch on the right, as the crowned center moved under him, a feather-light change where a patch repair began and ended. He kept the wheel like a soup bowl held carefully with 2 hands. He did not blink more than he needed to blink. The first light to return wasn't a tower. It was the pale squareness of the back of a portable sign up on the shoulder ahead. A road crew had tucked it off, asleep, reflecting only the kindness of his beams. Beyond it, like someone letting their breath out after holding it too long, a far tower winked red. One long blink. Pause. Another long blink. Farther down the string, 2 quicks answered. The plain beat settled into something like grammar again. He was not the sort to make big vows in a cab when no one else was listening, but he did make a small one. He would not be embarrassed to do what the lights asked, even if he couldn't prove why. He slid his speed down a handful, let the truck feel absolutely planted, and listened with his eyes. At mile 311, where the land rose enough to call it a hill if you were being generous, the beacons to his left 3 towers in a gentle diagonal fell into 3 quick. Pause. 3 quick. On the shoulder, a billboard skeleton revealed itself out of darkness, a down on its luck frame that had once held a smiling face, now welcoming only owls. The upright nearest the road cast a narrow blacker than black line across his lane. Past it, the right lane narrowed around a scatter of hard shadow. He saw the object at the last moment, safe allows. Retread. A big one, like a sleeping alligator. All cords and bad intentions. The pattern had given him those extra seconds when extra seconds turn lives into work instead of stories. There's an exit out there that locals call Arno Road, although the map gives it a number instead of a name. The sign for it is green and impatient in daylight. At night, it hums with its own electricity. Arno Road has a companion ghost. If you ask a certain dispatcher in a certain town, he never names. When Noah came up on what his mind told him was the Arno Road exit sign, he reached for his turn signal because the warehouse he needed to reach by morning sat 2 miles south of that ramp. His eye flicked left, and the towers 3 ridgelines away held their red spots dark. Not off for good, off like someone choosing not to speak in a group for a reason. He took his hand back off the stalk. On high, the green on the overhead gantry said Arno, RD, in block letters. His headlights caught the little chain that holds the fiberglass panel to its frame, the way those panels sometimes move with wind, like a loose tooth. He stayed the course, lane center, heart doing a translation of doubt into patience. The sign passed above him with the normal whir a nighttime sign makes. A second sign appeared 50 yards later that read Arno RD again, exactly the same tilt and the same chain nick. He didn't touch the signal. He did not breathe for 2 beats. A third showed, slightly misaligned in a way no state contractor would allow, then vanished as if turning its back. The towers lifted their red voices again, too short on the right edge of the world, long on the left. He stayed where he was. When the real ramp finally arrived, it arrived not as a green word, but as the simple geometry of pavement peeling away a shoulder arrow on the ground, a break in the rumble strip, a slope that invited rather than insisted. He took that one and felt a silly, honest relief float up in him like a cut helium balloon. The ramp fed onto a frontage road where a way station sat in a blue and white box of a building like something a child would draw if invited to draw a small building that watches bigger ones. The signs were asleep. The scale deck looked like something that dreamed of numbers in a neat grid. He rolled past, slow, and saw a trooper's cruiser parked under the overhang. No lights, calm posture. The trooper inside lifted a hand without looking directly over, in the way 2 strangers acknowledge a night they are both borrowing. Noah almost pulled in to ask about the towers and their beat. Then let the idea go the way you let a lyric go. When you can't remember the next line, you don't punish the moment for not being a song. Back on the main lane, a convoy of pilot cars unfolded from the darkness with amber arrow boards pointing and repointing like patient teachers. Oversized size load coming through, high and wide, the sort of thing you escort like a ceremonial float. The towers on the horizon went one long solid hold as the wide load ghosted by in the other lanes, nothing but black under a quilt of reflective tape, no sense of its top, until it had already carried itself past. His lane stayed empty a beat too long, then filled with the normal night again, as if nothing had happened. Near a rest area whose vending machines wore a sun-faded promise of cherry cola, Noah eased off to refill his thermos with water, because coffee late becomes coffee nobody likes in the morning. The lot was almost empty. 2 trucks idled nose to nose like dogs greeting each other through a fence. A payphone structure stood with its handset long gone. A blue bell on a metal stick telling a story about when the world needed these everywhere. As he stood under the eave of the restroom building, a bell sound rang out across the lot. Soft, exact, a single tone that belonged in 1993. He turned toward it without stepping, and the sound did not repeat. The lights beyond the restrooms flickered once, not from electricity, but from fog doing one of its brief theater tricks. The tower line to the east was hidden by trees. He felt an instinct he couldn't name. Make 2 suggestions at the same time. Stay. And go. He went. Staying had no job to do. The final run to the town he was aiming for took him past a construction site like a shipyard had walked out into a field. 2 cranes stood, with their booms crossed. Temporary concrete barrier, poured in gray segments, corralled his lane into an arc he could follow if he looked past it, to where he wanted to end up instead of at it like a thing to survive. On the horizon, the towers arranged a pattern he hadn't seen yet, left and right, blinking, alternating like a pair of eyes looking from side to side. It wasn't a warning he knew how to count. He felt his throat tighten a little. He let the truck find center between barriers, with the humility of someone balancing a full glass on a tray. Halfway through, the right lane opened as if inviting him to try it on. The left looked narrow as a thought you can't quite finish. The right felt luxurious by comparison. He put a hair more pressure into his left palm, kept the left, and passed a low dark shape taking up most of that right lane. The ramp of a flatbed tipped down, unattended for the moment between night moves. No cones jet. No flares. Somebody was about to put themselves in position. He used their not quite readiness as a lesson, thanked a thing he had no words for, and kept on. At the next truck plaza, a big box with a roofline designed to be friendly to a sky that holds hail sometimes, he parked under a light that knew its job. Bugs wrote their little alphabets in the beam. Inside, a man with a screwdriver and a plastic organizer of batteries was fixing a pump display. He nodded the nod of someone who has been night company for 1,000 strangers and knows the gift of not asking too much. Long straight, the man said, as if they'd been talking. Long, Noah agreed. The man gestured with the chin of someone who had one more screw to tighten. Lights out there were playing around. Happens when the box in Bessemer gets stubborn. Cranes mess with it. Storms mess with it. Some nights they keep time like a choir. Some nights they go their own ways. My cousin swears they save his life now and then. Noah smiled in a way that didn't ask for a story he might not want to hear. They were informative. Tonight. The man tested the display numbers behaved. He wiped his hands on a towel that had seen 1,000 wipes. I used to run a small tower. Microwave, not broadcast. If you stare at any blink long enough, you make a language out of it. Sometimes that language turns out to be right. He pushed the last battery into its slot. Care for lemon pie? It tastes better if you pretend. I'll try the lemon, Noah said. And the pie did taste like something kinder than the hour. He sat a while at the little counter that held coffee cups with not quite matching saucers, and a jar of toothpicks nobody touched anymore. He wrote on a napkin without thinking about it much. 2 quick wind, 3 quick road, long hold wait, alternating construction. He folded the napkin and put it in his visor like a small flag no one else would need to see. Morning found the towers again, but without their red marks. In daylight they looked like any tall, busy thing, triangles of steel stacked to the sky. Guy wires making geometry across fields. Cows stood under one as if the shade there was somehow different shade. The VMS on the interstate flashed an ordinary note. Bridge work ahead, merge early. The world held its chores out plainly. The night didn't need to talk to him about them anymore. At the warehouse, a forklift driver in a reflective vest and a knit cap waved him back with the slow, authoritative gestures of someone who was writing the word "here" in the air with his hands. The rolls came out with respectful clunks, and then the lighter sound of empty pallets. Paper dust glittered in a shaft of light where someone had left a bay door cracked. The air smelled like ink, not yet applied. When they handed him his signed bill, the receiver mentioned heavy fog they'd had earlier on the bypass, and a near miss with a car that had mistaken the shoulder for a lane. Noah nodded and said something neutral. He didn't need the story to agree with his napkin to believe it was all the same conversation. On his way back toward the interstate, he passed a little municipal yard where a man in a bucket was replacing a red beacon bulb at the top of a short pole by the water tower. The man's helper stood below with a spool of wire and a look of concentration that said he respected electricity. Noah found himself slowing just a breath to watch them do a small, exact thing to help the night speak politely. He didn't wave. They didn't look down. It wasn't the kind of night he brought out to decorate talk. It lived better in the quiet drawer where he kept the map he didn't need anymore, and the spare pair of gloves that only came out in bitter weather. Every so often, though, when the road stretched ahead with no obligations but speed and attention, and the towers on his left and right started keeping time with each other like a red choir with a folded hymn, he would let the beat count him into the next hour. If the lights went strange again, he decided, he would not treat it like a dare. He would treat it like a metronome. You don't argue with one of those. You listen. You set your hands to the work. You keep the tempo the road gives you, and when the world goes quiet for a little while, you count with your fingers and trust the shape that returns. Story number 6. They mark the edges of that valley with signs that most drivers only half read in daylight. You are entering a radio-quiet area. No transmitters. No Wi-Fi. CB, use. Discouraged. Please limit electronics. The first time Cass Whitaker passed those signs years ago, he smiled at the notion that a whole place could prefer silence. Tonight, rolling a dry van full of laboratory glassware toward a town tucked in the folds of the hills, he felt the signs as a border like stepping from a noisy kitchen into a library, where even footsteps seem to think over each step before it takes it. Cass liked company in the form of sound, an old AM station reading farm prices, tires purring, refrigeration units from the other lane carrying on in polite murmurs. He wasn't loud. He wasn't a talker. He just liked knowing the world was busy around him. When he eased past the road, last cell tower blinking goodbye, and the highway bent toward the valley, his cab collected a special kind of quiet that did not feel empty so much as focused. The radio found nothing but a soft floor of air. The CB breathed once, and then changed its mind. His phone displayed a little airplane that meant it, for once, was the least useful object in the truck. The hills here were old, rounded like shoulders worn smooth by years. Woods crowded close to the two-lane where the four-lane narrowed. A thin mist held itself up between trunks. Not quite fog, not quite breath. At a turnout with a low board that named a trailhead Salt Lick Run, someone had pinned laminated cards listing the rules of the quiet. No motors on the lake. No drones. No unnecessary horn use, day or night. He read them while rolling and felt the words settle along with the gear he'd chosen. He lifted off the throttle and let the engine whisper down to a number he trusted on unknown grade. There are places in the world where quiet sits like weather. In this valley, it was a resident, not a visitor. Bridges spoke differently, wooden planks thudding softly under the steer tires, and then under the drives like someone tapping a finger on a table twice. Creaks made themselves known without demanding attention, low and patient. The power lines didn't sing. They drew graphite lines across the sky and chose to say nothing. The first town upstairs had its porch lights shaded with metal hoods, light turned toward doorsteps and away from the sky. Out of habit, Cass glanced at the dark windows and put names to the house's white two-story steep roof red barn out back, because knowing the shapes helps a person keep place in a night that wants to fold all edges. As he rounded into the narrowest part of the valley, locals called it the Notch. The road shouldered up against a rock wall on the right. A wooden sign, hand-painted in sturdy block letters, caught his beams. Fog formed suddenly a notch. If visibility changes, wait for the hush to pass. He read it twice and half smiled. Wait for the hush to pass. The phrasing felt old-fashioned and brand new at the same time. Then the hush arrived. It didn't swallow the sound all at once. It tightened the edges of it. Tires made less of themselves. The subtle whine from the alternator flattened until it barely suggested anything. The world sounded like a piece of felt laid gently over anything that might rattle. He breathed and could not quite hear the breath he made. It wasn't terrifying. It was precise. He rolled off the throttle a little more, not because the sign had suggested it, but because the air made the request in a way his hands understood without words. Ahead, the curve offered up a short, single-lane tunnel blasted through the rock and lined with concrete. Older than his truck by decades, it had a face like a patient teacher. Signage before it told opposing traffic to yield. Cass eased toward it, lights low, engine brake-off out of courtesy. Inside the tunnel, a faint clicking sound emerged at his left, soft, regular, like a miniature train schedule board flipping its tiles. He glanced metal housing, a physical flip-dot message sign mounted to the wall, the kind that doesn't need radio waves to tell it what to do. Its dots flapped from black to yellow and formed words in slow, careful letters. Stop a headslide. The hush made the little clicks sound louder than they were. He breathed, let his foot ease more off, and came out of the tunnel to a wider curve, where stone and soil had slumped across the far lane in a low, moist heap. Not a disaster, not a story for the news, just the kind of honest earthwork that a spring night likes to make after a week of rain. A county truck with a light bar sat 20 yards beyond with its light hooded, a man with a shovel standing next to it with his hands in his pockets like someone waiting for a friend to arrive. A sawhorse wrapped in reflective tape stood guard. There was room to ease around. Cass did not ease around. He stopped with his tires on clean pavement and watched the flashlight the county man raised. The man didn't wave him through. He held the beam low and then pointed gently, left the kind of careful pointing that says, "We have a plan for this." A second sign, another flip-dot panel perched on a tripod, took its time flipping, "Old Telegraph, 13-4. Slow. The hush gathered itself under the truck like a held breath as he turned off onto the detour road you'd miss in daylight because it looked like a driveway to a pasture. Old Telegraph kept its narrowness in decent repair, patched in places the way quilts are patched, plainly and proudly. The map in Cass's head laid it along the creek, then up a short rise, then back down to the main road beyond the slide. Trees arched over it, their leaves last year's holding drops that the night had polished. A barred owl spoke once, low and reasonable, and then returned to whatever owls returned to. On the downslope, the hush deepened in a way that made him think of snow, even though the air was the soft wet of spring. He rolled across a wooden bridge with a roof that turned his lights amber for 3 seconds. The creek beneath the boards moved quick and quiet, as if it too had been asked to lower its voice. On the far side, a fence post wore an old ceramic insulator like jewelry. Half a mile later, Old Telegraph met the highway again at a T. No flares, no LED arrows, No shouting signs. Just a metal sign hung on a chain across the far lane, road closed ahead, and a second on his side that had been covered with a canvas hood to tell him, indirectly, that he'd chosen correctly. He idled onto the main road. The hush loosened a little, as if satisfied that he had done what it asked. The flip-dot message board in his mirror clicked itself back to blank. He tasted relief, simple, physical relief that feels like warm water on cold hands. Past the detour, the valley opened to a long, low meadow holding mist like milk. A white barn with a star painted on it sat calmly in all that gentleness. He passed a small campground with no people, and an old telephone booth set up mostly for photographs. A man sat on the bench beside it with a paper cup, a wool cap pulled low, the posture of someone who lives in a place and knows it's ours. He lifted 2 fingers off the cup, greeting as quietly as a knight that dislikes grand gestures. There is a listening dish out here, white as a bone and big as a courthouse. At night, it sleeps in a neutral position, not pointing anyone anywhere. Cass misunderstood it the first few times. He'd seen it as a boy from a photo in a magazine, imagining it shouted at the sky. It didn't. It listened, like the valley, like the road at this hour. As he passed the sign, "Turn off, no visitors at night." Respect the quiet, he felt a kind of kinship between the big, patient ear and the small, patient old sign in the tunnel, and the way his own hands had learned to move gently when someone asked them to. He had a delivery window marked in pencil. He had plenty of time. The hush had taken 5 minutes. He would give back that 5 minutes in calm instead of speed. The road encouraged that choice, without argument. Mile markers came steady. A deer stood on the shoulder with the concrete posture of a statue. It didn't bolt. It nodded at the truck, as if it recognized something about its noise, or lack of it, and turned its head away, satisfied. At a pull-off marked vista that in daytime looked over hills folded like blankets, he eased in because the habit of pausing here had become a private ritual. A wooden box Park Service brown was mounted to the railing. A small plaque said info in white letters and, underneath, "Do not leave pamphlets." Inside the box, instead of pamphlets, sat a wind-up flashlight and a ledger notebook with a pencil on a string. The inscription in the front of the book asked politely, "Night drivers, if the hush caught you in the notch and you waited, you may write the time. It helps the crew." Cass grinned at the honesty of that ask. No apps, no pings, a book. He wound the flashlight once, saw that it made a sensible dim cone, and wrote 213 slight fog slide after tunnel detour, signed all well. When he closed the box, he heard another sound arrive into the quiet, like a footstep in a long hall. It came from a far corner of the lot, near a small building with a soda machine front blanked out by tape. A little mechanical panel, another flip-dot face. This one waist-high clacked and formed a simple arrow pointing down the hill, then a line of letters. "Watch the deer in 7. He looked at the number 7 as if it were a person. 7 what? Steps? Minutes? He did not know. He breathed. He counted to 7 slow, because it seemed the thing to do. At the edge of the beam from the wind-up light, on the second beat after 7, 3 deer moved like thoughts being remembered, sliding from a patch of unseen grass into the open. They crossed the empty highway without hurry, like residents with good standing, and disappeared into the trees at the other side. The hush had made room for them and told him how to wait. He smiled like someone watching a simple magic trick performed well. Back on the road, the edges of the valley pulled away like curtains at the end of a performance. The radio did what radios do when the rules allow, again searched, found, stitched together a station selling tires and then music and then weather. It sounded too loud, even at a volume that would have been shy an hour ago. He turned it off and, with a chuckle he didn't need to share, left the cab to its own noises. There was enough company in the tick of the dash and the fine breath of the heater and the gentle squeak his seat made when the truck took a curve that required nothing more than patience. At a wide pull-off by a dark gas station with an old Shell sign that had given up making its shell into a shape, he saw a man in a county vest fitting a metal cover over a modern digital road sign. The cover was colorless, like a tin roof in moonlight. The man stepped down from a ladder and looked over with the frank appraisal of someone who is often asked what he's doing and would prefer to be asked politely. "Cover keeps it from talking," the man said, as if answering a question politely asked. "We got rules about quiet. Electronic boards tickle the air too much. Old flip dots don't. He tapped the cover with his knuckles. Funny thing. Folks respect a hush if you give it to them properly. They drive better in it. Cass nodded. Stopped at the tunnel, he said. Good, the man said, and his face rearranged itself from dutiful to pleased. Old telegraph is honest when it rains. Watch the creek rock after the schoolhouse. It sticks the rear end breathing if you hit it wrong. Appreciate it. Safe night, the man said, because safe feels appropriate when good would be too forward. The schoolhouse came a mile later, pale and square against the trees, with a bell that nobody rang anymore except maybe on a holiday. The creek rock was exactly where the man had said it would be, shouldering up through the asphalt in a bump that, if taken badly, could jostle things that shouldn't be jostled. Cass moved over it like a person stepping over a sleeping dog. Behind him, the glass in its packing stayed glass in its packing. By the time he pulled into the warehouse yard on the far side of the quiet, the eastern horizon was coloring in faint pencil lines. The night clerk, unflappable by profession, scanned his bill, stamped it with the small authority of a stamped thing, and said, "You come through the valley? They turn all your noise off?" "They asked me to," Cass said, and the line sounded right as soon as he said it. He backed to the dock with the grace that always sneaks up at the end of long nights. His steer tires kissed the painted line. The dock light came on with a simple hum. Pallets rolled, straps loosened with the pop of webbing, remembering it could relax. The lift humming polite low notes. The truck, a big animal allowed to rest, settled into itself. He slept in the corner of a lot under a light that had the decency to aim itself mostly at the pavement. He woke to full day with birds making a noise that would have been too much at 2 in the morning, and was perfect at 8. Coffee from a diner across the street tasted the way coffee tastes when you watch the pot being poured instead of listening to it through a drive-through speaker. He thought to turn the radio on and didn't. He left the quiet on its shelf inside his head, where it sat like a useful tool. On the return, because human beings are creatures of curiosity even when they are careful, he went a mile out of his way to stop by the valley's visitor center the size of a large kitchen, wooden, with a rack of maps and a small-scale model of the big listening dish made of painted foam. A woman behind the counter wore a sweater the color of moss and a name badge that said, Lucy. She said hello like someone not trying to disturb anything more than necessary. "I wrote in your book," he said, not sure why he felt the need to say it. "Glad you did," she replied. "Helps the overnight crew know when the hush had you. The air sits unusual in the notch. Sound behaves like a person, it takes shortcuts. We put the old flipboards in because they tell without telling too much." She smiled in a way that set you at ease. Folks always want to know why quiet matters. There's a scientific answer. There's another answer too. People think better when the world asks them to be gentle. He looked at the model dish. "You listen," he said. "We do," she said, as if she were part of the dish. He left with a paper map he didn't need, and a small bar of local soap that smelled a little like hay. The day took him back toward places where the road likes to speak up. The cell bars filled. A billboard asked him to try a new breakfast item with too many syllables. A Doppler radar picture rolled itself into being on a screen when he asked for it. All of it felt useful again. None of it could quite push off the piece of quiet the valley had placed in his pocket. That night, 3 states west and a long plane away, the interstate ran through a stretch where the wind worked hard for its living. His radio carried a storm siren from a town 20 miles off. Maybe a test, maybe not. His mirrors shook a little with gusts. He checked his straps by eye, by ear, by long habit. The hush from the notch returned in memory like a person standing quietly just inside a doorway, not interrupting, waiting. He turned his radio down, not off, and eased the engine brake back a notch. The truck settled. The wind found less to bite. He watched a wall of dust on the far horizon march like a low, tattered curtain, and decided to sit it out on the lee side of a concrete plant with a row of cedars doing their best to be helpful. He waited for 7 minutes, because 7 had become his private number, and then 3 beyond that for caution's sake. The curtain passed in a brown stream. He went on. No one writes warnings for that in a book under a wooden lid on this prairie. No flip-dot signs clack. No dish listens. But for the rest of his runs, whenever the road got loud about being the road, he could reach for that pocket piece of quiet and set it on the dash between the radio and the old paper atlas. It was not something you could see. It was not something you could prove. It was a way to ask the night for its terms, and then agree to them, not because you had to, but because it made the miles behave. Drivers talk about the valley in the simplest language they have. They say, "Turn down your noise there. The place keeps its own." They say, "If a sign clicks, read it, even if it takes its time." They say, "The quiet is not a threat, it's a mirror. It reflects how you're working." The story gets passed around parking lots and over counters without anyone needing to add garnish. In a world of bright and busy, the tale lives in low voice. And if it holds on a little in a driver's head after the motor is off and sleep is thinking about saying hello, that's fine. The hush there is not trying to take anything. It's trying to hand something back, a small, steady silence that does not let go, because it turns out to be one of the best tools a person can carry when the road asks a question and expects a careful answer. And that brings us to the end of tonight's long haul through the dark highways and empty backroads. Another quiet set of stories from the men and women who keep the world moving while the rest of us sleep. As the rain taps gently on the windshield and the engine cools in the silence, let your mind settle, let the road fade behind you, and drift into a soft, peaceful rest. Thank you for riding along tonight. Stay safe out there, and good night.